From its first image, the Phantom Pain abounds in double meaning. What's more, even before the first sequence, all of its major themes have been alluded to, as shadows behind the surface. Fitting then that the opening seconds occur off-screen. Shadows hide easier in the dark. Consider this first of these three initial events, the disclaimer title card. Pretty standard as far as disclaimers go, but intentions aside, it takes on incredible irony contextualized within MGS5.
Solo covert actions are standard Fox operating procedure.
Then I'll just have to take care of myself, huh?
1964, Soviet territory. Fox's first mission. Any mess you made, I was there to clean up.
This isn't just a work of fiction, after all. MGS5 fictionalizes events from its own series canon. This nested or meta-fiction structure makes the point that often enough the perceived fictitious elements of today become actual persons and events tomorrow, just as they did way back in yesterday. All of this is alluded to by the single innocuous-seeming title card in all its ambiguity. By the second of these three initial events, the game signals that its narrative has begun in medias res. Yet, as defined in this term's Encyclopedia Britannica entry, quote, "The situation is an extension of previous events and will be developed in later action," end quote. Based on the surface level of what we're later told, though, the crash's significance to the overall plot is ambiguous. About as ambiguous as specifying exactly when the narrative begins. Did it begin with the irony of the first title card? Or does it begin at the point the audio comes in here? Or does it begin at whatever event caused this plane to crash in the first place? Regardless, the result is functionally the same, whatever the true intent or meaning. That's a rough preamble for a kind of design model we'll come to discuss later on.
It's not unlike the way life started in the oceans 4 billion years ago.
But first, note the pattern. Most would agree the first three moments follow an ABA structure of on-screen text, off-screen audio, and on-screen again. This might seem trivial, but I'd like to point out objectively that this is actually an incorrect perceptual distortion. Reading words feels differently than hearing sounds, even sounds of speech. But regardless, both are, at bottom, information waves that are carried through the air and picked up by the SIGINT wing of your brain, aka the mother base command platform inside your skull. That SIGINT team reports signs of an off-screen air crash following what sounds like total communication breakdown on board. Considering the surface level importance of this scene is, as I said, at best ambiguous, why does the game start here? Modern civilization and its technology has designed our global system to sustain itself not unlike the modern air traffic control system and its array of interrelated personnel, technology, and protocols. If we think of the air traffic control process as a single body, a superorganism if you will, we'll note several key weaknesses it shares with the modern structure of sociopolitics. On the plus side, the productivity of a group or network is always much higher than that of an individual, even more so if it's decentralized. Yet this productivity comes with its fair share of prices. Just as it takes a group of technicians and entirely separate classes of equipment all coordinating together to maintain the modern airport, it takes a group of financial bodies, international political unions, trade agreements, and legal precedent to maintain the modern global economic system. But what happens when the pilots try to fly without comms or functioning equipment? Obviously, the plane crashes. Just as power only flows through a completed circuit, a network functions only as a united system. Taking out one part prevents the entire body from standing on its own. This puts the individual and their role in society into a unique juxtaposition when you think about it. Because society runs on systems which de-emphasize the single in lieu of the communal, this inadvertently gives the individual great power to harm. Single actors can devastate entire nations and markets and with single lines of code. Yet that's the only time they really matter anymore. To the system, they matter less as a citizen and more as a potential threat to the citizenry as an abstract plurality. This arises in doublethink. To protect the people, the system opposes the person. Again, because the threat a single individual has today is unparalleled in human history. How does the system respond to these threats? By growing even more systematized, because that's all it knows how to do. When our own system is growing, only to grow, when it creates its own enemies in order to perpetuate that growth, this induces a collective feedback loop on the world. Just like the pilots we hear die in the opening moments of the scene, our lives depend on staying connected and responsive. To break off from the system would be to amputate our own limb, while remaining dependent on it perpetuates our constant sense of weakness, irrelevance, and fear. We now come to the last in a trio of moments before MGS5 shows off any of the Fox engine. It is no nation we inhabit, but a language. Make no mistake, our native tongue is our true fatherland. There would be no languages, no societies, without individual members. There would be no you, no body, without your individual microbial community members. They are us and we are they. To inhabit a language implies not only that we live inside our language, like bacteria thrive inside us, it also implies, like the bacteria for us, we for language are the true hosts. This makes the term fatherland key. In particular, the Phantom Pain is interested in the concept of inherited sin, passed down like genes from the patriarchal architects of society to everyone born within their language, customs, and culture. This establishes a recurring tone of guilt and shame, actually, throughout the game, networking together generations within a shared fate, shared sin. We might recognize this sentiment, actually, as first expressed by the closing song of MGS3, Way to Fall. As we roll into the first proper scene, it becomes clear that along with guilt, shame, and society, the Phantom Pain will also deal with the nature of memories, hope, and pain. In short, the subjective phantoms lurking within our brain. But what only becomes clear by a second playthrough is that the entire game is likely being told through flashbacks, outside time or space, as pure memory. We recognize all the gear in the room visible in the opening shot from later in the game, for example. That the entire narrative has been filtered through the psyche of a brain-damaged phantom whose past memories are as real and immediate to him as the present, is conveyed by the fact that it begins and ends in the same room, and seemingly with the same series of events. When we compare and combine clips from the beginning and end, however, we see the doubling distortion of memories much more clearly. It seems likely that these are not two separate events nor duplicates of the same event, but rather two conflicting memories of the same event. Even the first and last sounds we hear dovetail into each other, suggesting short-circuiting loops without end.
No time for anesthetic. We have to open her now. Boss.
do you remember? Who you are? What you were meant to do?
But the real differences aren't so much in what happens as how. In the opening, Snake's extremely out of focus, still a hollowed out meme vessel, a faceless non-entity. And as the beginning shot zooms directly into the Walkman, the meaning becomes clear with the second playthrough. This tape contains a meme cocktail, a story with its own language, own constellation of meanings and narratives our character will use to understand, invent, or remember an explanation for who he is and how he came to be here. By contrast, the ending return to this scene features Snake much more prominently. In this version of events, the replication has already been completed. For a brief moment, we remember the trauma of our past life, and this memory seems to be the key which unlocks a different reimagining of events. But which is the real truth? What does that even mean to us? The mind is capable of many illusions, of pain, the future. These questions are outside our script, our language, as given to us by MGS-5 itself. Just as it's impossible for a single air traffic controller to maintain a scheduled 24 hours of international flights, it's impossible to interpret or act on all the data at once here. We can't see all in one glimpse the full truth because it's been decentralized. It's gone from a top-down to bottom-up configuration. We can no more learn the truth of what's outside our allowed role in the system at large than we can become part of a foreign culture without its language. If that language and its truths, so to speak, are lost, then our perceptual capacities as a species or as an individual shrink, and we lose that truth into the mist of time forever. Yet fragments of lost truths can linger, driving conflict between maps, both mental and political. And it's here we depart from the airport analogy in lieu of a related yet much older complex system, the brain.
On the left, we see a termite castle, an Australian termite castle. On the right, we see Gaudi's famous Sagrada Familia church in Barcelona. They are remarkably similar in shape and in construction, even inside. And yet, I propose, they are built and designed by profoundly different processes. The one on the left is built by termites who are, I hope I don't offend any termite lovers here, they're pretty clueless. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're doing it. There is no architect termite or boss. There's a queen termite, but she's not really the boss. They're just mindlessly, cluelessly, uncomprehendingly doing their little thing, and this amazing castle arises. Gaudi, on the other hand, is almost a comic caricature of the creative genius, the megalomaniac, big boss, lording it over everybody, publishing manifestos, raising money with very grandiose gestures and all the rest. So you couldn't have a better contrast between Gaudi, the top-down intelligent designer, the genius, and the termites, the clueless bottom-up builders. So we have bottom-up design versus top-down design, and here's a puzzle. If you think of your brain as a termite colony several orders of magnitude larger, you wonder how can you get the kind of top-down intelligence that Gaudi exhibits out of a brain which is a very large collection of basically uncomprehending little single cells, neurons.
The solution to Dennett's puzzle, what he calls the hard question, has yet to be found. Yet the evidence suggests we somehow both are and are not our physical selves. It sounds paradoxical, I know, but I'd argue it's because the assumption of a single self, an author, is encoded within our very language. It's a meme that fundamentally shapes how we see the world, and our existence in it. Usually that self is the hero of a story, a center of a circle, a little world, which seems to revolve around him. I know how direct and self-evident this half-truth may strike us, may strike we the people. But contrary to popular belief, no truth is really self-evident. That naive Enlightenment era sentiment was roundly, albeit inadvertently, disproven in 1931.
Many of us have the romantic idea that the whole point of mathematical proof is to establish facts beyond all possible doubt. For us romantics, a single contradiction in mathematics would put the whole edifice in doubt. But two results, published in 1931 by Kurt Gödel, presented a blow to this view of mathematics. Can we use this system to show that there cannot be a contradiction amongst the results we can prove using the system? Well, Gödel showed that the answer can be yes, which might seem like good news, except that the answer is yes if and only if the system does in fact contain a contradiction. In other words, if our system is consistent, that is, it doesn't contain contradictions, then we cannot prove it is consistent. But if our system is not consistent, then we can prove that it is consistent. That was Gödel's second incompleteness theorem. His first incompleteness theorem tells us, in a consistent mathematical system like this, there are results which are true, which we cannot prove to be true. Anyway, how did Gödel prove these devastating theorems? Essentially, he created a version of the liar paradox, this statement is false. Using a clever coding system to represent mathematics by integers, he effectively creates a proposition that says, this statement is not provable within our system. If that sentence could be proved, we'd have a contradiction. So the statement cannot be proved, therefore it is true.
Which established, in mathematical terms, that self-evident axioms, assertions in other words, are not nearly as reliable, consistent, or all-affirming as historically assumed. In other words, self-evidence and truth don't necessarily lead to each other. I know what you're probably thinking, but I know I'm me. I feel, like an individual. I have my individual interests, preferences, and ideas. I have my personal dreams, secrets, nightmares, and lies. I decide for myself how to live my life, and I'm responsible for my successes, my failures, and my moral triumphs and shortcomings. All these point to the undeniable sense that you are you and only you, right? I mean, that's certainly how I feel about myself, anyway. It's impossible to deny that self is fundamental to how human beings process their own existence.
All rhetoric to avoid conflict and protect each other from hurt.
But consider what happens whenever you lose a limb.
Ouch! Get out of my mind, liquid!
Sections of your brain will rewrite its map of your body, and things can go wrong. Wires can become tangled, in a sense. This could mean the receptors, which formerly mapped a virtual image of that limb you lost, are now stimulated every time you, say, smile or move. This stimulation can manifest the phenomena known as a phantom limb. And as Dr. Ramachandran explains in his landmark Phantoms in the Brain, some amputees will experience lingering pain in their phantom, a strange pain that remains unexplained concretely, though many, like Dr. Ramachandran, have theories. Ramachandran proved that using a mirror could effectively trick the brain into confronting the reality of its missing limb. For the first time, sufferers of phantom pain could feel relief. Though Dr. Ramachandran's ideas produce pragmatic and immediate treatment possibilities, the medical community is still unsure of what ultimately causes the condition. For Dr. Ramachandran, it demonstrated firsthand how all mental state experiences, or qualia as it's called by philosophers, are in some sense phantoms virtually projected by and inside the brain. As he writes, quote, "Your own body is a phantom, one that your brain has temporarily constructed purely for convenience," end quote. Though we feel consciousness to be facing in the top-down direction and take that to be a sure sign of our own individuality, out of one we are really many. Through some miracle, the unthinking activity of neurons and neural networks come to form our consciousness, our active, pseudo-individual mind. Yet that mind's awareness of pain is a lot like its awareness of truth. Neither reflect an unmediated image of reality. Both are interpretations formed by the literal translation of sensory stimuli into nerve impulses and other representational languages inside the mind. But that's not all. Whenever the brain tries to make sense of itself and its surroundings, it makes a second kind of translation. As Professor Hirari explains in the excellent Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, quote, "The left hemisphere of the brain is the seat not only of our verbal abilities, but also of an internal interpreter that constantly tries to make sense of our life using partial clues in order to concoct plausible stories." End quote. Professor Harari inadvertently boosts my argument of comparing states, cells, and selves when he compares the right hemisphere's relationship to the left with that between the CIA and the State Department. Quote, "Again and again, my own private CIA does things without the approval or knowledge of my State Department, and then my State Department cooks up a story that presents me in the best possible light. Often enough, the State Department itself becomes convinced of the pure fantasies it has invented." End quote. For all these reasons, it should be clear that the ultimate pure fantasy is the very concept of a single self. You, strictly speaking, do not exist. Because what we call you is really a commonwealth, a unity of experiencing and narrating selves, roughly corresponding to the hemispheres of your brain. And of course, these hemispheres themselves are also commonwealth systems, comprised of not one but many functions, relations, and roles. In short, human beings, from neuron to person, from state to self to cell, function via bottom-up design. But what's the point? I mean, what does any of this have to do with MGS5, right? I claim it fundamentally explains why the game is so segmented, ambiguous, and seemingly inconsistent. It's because you are just a piece of a system, a contributor to a network. This means you don't need to be aware of what the network is ultimately doing or why, just as the neurons in your brain aren't aware of what you're doing or why. Nor do you have to be an unthinking zombie like your neuron. Because you're a human being, you can be trusted by the system to perceive what it tells you the same way that you perceive heroes, minds, truths, and reality. You can be trusted to always want to see a top-down model, a story, with you as the genius at the center, because that's what all humans do innately. Where we project our phantoms of top-down design, or what we call meaning and will, there is only ever degrees of bottom-up design. There are no single selves, only single cells. There are no legendary heroes, only legends. There is no right or wrong objectively, only fit and unfit memes, which shift and morph with the flow of time and the changes in politics. There is no objective truth, only beliefs in truth, with contingent, often arbitrary relation with reality. There are no solid shapes, only simulations and illusions. There is no mirror of reality, only translations. There is no history outside genealogy, paleontology, and memeology, only pseudo-historical recreations, fragments, and echoes of the past, heaps of broken images and fossils. Nothing is held true, only produced as true. And like any factory, the truth machine is a physical system. It depends upon an equilibrium of forces and pressures inside and out. All of this helps explain why words can kill, actually. A new idea can be so infectious that it throws the equilibrium into disarray. A mutated meme strain can be used like a hammer to smash loose the metal gears, keeping this truth factory of the dead going.